Welcome to Too Many Podcasts, the podcast about podcasts. Now, podcasting from the Sherpa Chalet on Mount Podcastia, here's your host, Jim, the podcast Sherpa.
Thank you so much, Mr. Bruce. Hey there. You must have made it. You're probably one of the rebels of the Sherpalution. Thank you so much for coming to check out Too Many Podcasts. And yes, this is the season 1 finale. But don't worry, there's going to be more. And what if you just joined us? That's okay. The other episodes are right there on your favorite podcast app to check out. And I hope you do check them out because we really had a lot of fun this season. And don't worry, there's going to be a season 2 also. Today's show is being brought to you by Audible.com. Audible.com is the premier provider of digital audiobooks. There are over 180,000 titles to choose from in every genre, like thrillers, business, romance, comedy, sci-fi, and more. Audible titles play on iPhone, Kindle, Android, and more than 500 devices for listening anytime, anywhere. 500 devices. Do I even have 500 devices? I'll have to check my closet. Because you're listening to this podcast, you can get a free audiobook download and a 30-day free trial at www.audibletrial.com/Sherpa. Hey, pretty good deal, right? And you think you're going to miss out on something coming to the season finale? No, not at all. Hey, let me ask you something. Did you ever get an earworm? You know what that is, right? When you get a song stuck in your head, kind of like, what's the best way I can describe it?
It's theme week. It's theme week. It's theme week.
Yeah, like that. That's right. That's an earworm. This week's theme is true crime. We made it to talking about true crime podcasts.
Who's our guest today, Sherpa?
I'm glad you asked. Who's our guest today? It's Korina and Dillon from Morning Cup of Murder. And I had such a great time talking with those two. Married couple, wonderful people, and a blast to interview as well. I think they had a really good time too, and I'm really happy for that. And their podcast is definitely worth checking out. They do these little 5-minute bits that have to do with murder and mayhem. Without any further ado, why don't we go down to the conference room of the Sherpa Chalet and we'll talk to them. Hey there, everybody out there in Podcastia. Tonight, we are not in the conference room of the Sherpa Chalet. Instead, we are at the crime scene investigation room of the Sherpa Chalet. Why? Because we're talking to the hosts of Morning Cup of Murder, or as I like to call it,
Morning Cup of Murder.
And I would like to introduce you to the hosts, Korina and her husband, Dillon, who is the producer of the show. How you guys doing?
Hi.
Hi. I really liked the way you said the title. That was very good.
It's always been the vision.
We need a little dun dun dun.
Exactly.
All right. So why don't you guys tell us about yourselves?
So I am Korina. I am the host / researcher /
writer / voice / visionary / everything
of the show. And basically I am a stay-at-home / work-at-home mom, and I write about pretty gruesome murders during nap time. So we're recording this while the child is pretending to be asleep, but he is not. So yeah, that's basically what I do. So I'm part mom, part true crime addict.
And I'm Dillon. I edit the show and I do all the scheduling and reaching out back and forth with people online.
All right. I guess with all that slashing, that probably would make you a good attraction for true crime stories, right?
Yeah.
So how did the two of you meet?
So 10 years ago?
Yeah, 10 years ago when we were both 19, we met in college at a audition for a children's theater show.
Yep. I had just transferred to that college, so I didn't know anybody. So I just went out to the audition to kind of get my foot in the door at that school. And I met him, and the rest is history.
Yep, it'll be 10 years this year.
Yeah, and we met, got engaged a month after meeting, and got married a year later.
Oh, yeah.
You knew he was the one.
I did. I must have. It was very quick.
So, see, I ask you this so we can disperse any rumors that if they say that you met at a crime scene or something like that, and
Right.
walk up to you and said, hey, you guys have a nice way with the with a chalk outline.
Well, that would be a great story.
It's a nice outline you got there, miss.
That's for the website. There you go. That you can.
There you go. Yeah.
Thank you.
Now, I was listening to one of your preview shows because you just wrapped up your first season and you're going into your second season.
We finished the first month.
Okay.
Well, yeah, no,
I guess.
Well, we've started doing this at the beginning of every month because it's a daily show.
Okay.
There's a new format where we do a bonus episode on the first, kind of doing a couple like shout outs to anybody that's supporting the show or any big things that are happening with it, as well as kind of giving a preview of some of the more interesting,
a teaser.
Yeah, a teaser for some of the cases that are coming up.
Yeah.
I understand when I was listening to one of your monthly previews then that your inspiration for the podcast was basically a little desktop calendar.
Yeah. So like, I don't know how long these things have existed, but I remember like when I was a kid in the 90s, like everybody's desk had those like little pads that every day you ripped off a page and it was like today's word of the day or on this day in history. And when we got the little, like, I guess it's the Echo or whatever, the Alexa basically, she was like, had this option to do like a daily on this day in history as part of like your morning routine. So I heard that and I was like, that's really cool and all. Cause like, I mean, I like history. It's cool to know. But I told Dylan, I was like, wouldn't this be cool? Like totally catered to me, but very cool. If it had like on this day in history, this crime happened or this particular thing in true crime happened. And he was like, well, why don't you do it? So that's where it came from.
Who would have thought that a little thing like that would inspire you to do a great podcast?
Yeah, it was just like, it was such an offhanded thing to say. And if he hadn't turned around and said, why don't you do it? I probably just would have let the idea go and moved on.
Now, there's a podcast out called Insomniac, and it's about a podcaster who does true crime stories, but some of the stories actually haunted him in his sleep.
Oh,
so, and I was just curious if any of the stories that you've ever done like haunt you after you record them.
First of all, I have to add that podcast to my list because I've never heard of it. That sounds great.
It's pretty new.
Yeah. No, I guess I wouldn't say any of them haunt me because I feel like I can't let them affect me or I would never be able to do that, to do this podcast because it's daily, I don't get a break. Like I don't get a day where I can go, all right, today I'm not thinking about it. Or I don't get a day where I'm like, wow, that was just too much and I just can't deal with it for a couple of days. I can't really do that. So I guess I just read it. I read these stories, and I guess because I've been into it for so long, because I've been into true crime since I was a kid. So I think it's just to the point where like it doesn't affect me or bother me. But I will say on the other side of that the ones that give me like kind of like a pause are definitely the ones that have to do with kids, especially like as a parent. It's hard for you to think about that. It's hard for you to like picture that or imagine that, and you kind of have to like shut your brain off and be like, don't think about that, or don't ever imagine that. So those ones definitely give me pause, but I can't let it truly affect me or I would never be able to do the podcast.
Your show, it's basically 5 minutes long, and it's a nice capsulized version of these events. It's not too extensive and it's not too gory either.
Good. Yeah.
You keep the blood to a minimum, I guess.
I try.
Did you find any that were too gruesome to report?
Not yet. I think, like I said, if it wasn't something that I was already into, it definitely would. I will say, though, I do try and avoid a lot of triggering topics. So like ones that deal with like religion, race, or sexuality. I try to cover those. I do cover them every once in a while when I feel they're very important to hear about. But I try and make sure that I handle them with as much like respect and grace as I can. But so those ones, I wouldn't say gruesome, bother me, more so just ones that like are these small marginalized group where it's like your empathy gets to you.
Were there any stories that kind of fascinated you?
Oh my gosh. Yeah, I think stories that have to do with like the psychological part of it. So like there's always people that there's killers who go out and they just do it. They have no rhyme, no reason. They just do it. But then you've got these like deep-seated psychological ones. So you've got things like, like Ted Bundy, like he killed women that looked a very specific way. And it's like, what made him do that? Like what? So ones that make you go, why? Why did he do that? What made him do that specific thing? Like ones like that, or even ones that are like the Golden State Killer, who I haven't covered yet because it's a lot of work, but I will eventually. But like he evaded capture for so long. So it's like the ones like that where they've got that special something that make them different. And then like, of course, occult is always something good and fun to like read about. They're always interesting. They're always bizarre. And it's just, they're entertaining.
It's kind of like, taking something apart to like figure out why it's broken or what's off about it. Like if you think about it, like opening up a clock, it's like, what's going on in here that's making this tick a little weird? And so those are the ones that are fascinating. The ones that just, they're bizarre, they're weird. You can't figure it out.
Yeah, and I guess that's probably why there are a lot of true crime stories on, because like you said, people probably wonder what's going on inside their heads.
Exactly.
This is why we see little, TV shows too, that they don't really, make a presentation of this unusual mind of this person and look what they did. And, whether it's fiction, whether it's CSI.
Or CSI, yeah, that too. Like, I mean, there's the amount of true crime television shows and podcasts around right now are staggering at this point. There are so many, which makes me happy because I have plenty to digest myself. Like I have plenty to go watch and listen to. But yeah, I mean, even the ones the fiction ones, there's some basis in reality and like cases that really have happened. And it's always these fascinating, weird ones.
The one with Andy Patinkin used to be in it. And he was
Criminal Minds.
Criminal Minds, thank you very much.
Oh, that's one of my, ask Dylan, that's one of my favorite television shows. We've watched it a million times.
Yeah, and actually he left the show after the first 2 years because he said it got to him after a while.
I'm sure it did.
Out of the stories that you did, who was probably the most prolific murderer that you had?
Yeah, I think I've covered quite a few big ones, but I think the one that like, the two, I think that everybody, the minute you hear their names, everybody, doesn't matter if you're into true crime, doesn't matter, you know who they are. I've done Jeffrey Dahmer, I've done Charles Manson, and I actually did Charles Manson on obviously on the anniversary, but it was like the 50th? 50th. The 50th anniversary, so that was kind of like a big thing where like I was able to cover it on its 50th anniversary. So like, but I mean, like it doesn't matter if you've never even opened a true crime book, watched a television show, those two names. Even
like a generation of today is hearing about something that went on in the late 60s.
Right.
Like you said, his name kind of is synonymous with cults and serial killing.
For sure.
Who eluded capture the longest? Would it be the Golden State Killer?
I would say, like, I was thinking about this when I was reading the questions. I was trying to think of ones. There are tons that like the Golden State Killer did evade capture for forever. I haven't covered him yet, but I just know that off the top of my head, I can think of that one. But I did like start to look back at my old episodes and I was like, which one of these did, it just didn't, no one figured it out basically. And there's one and it hasn't aired yet. So this is kind of a tiny sneak peek, but it happens this month. It's the 15th, I believe. There was a case of this girl named Pam Millam, and she was walking back to her car after she left a college sorority party in 1972, and she disappeared. They couldn't find her, and the next day, her dad and sister, when they were looking for her, found her dead in the trunk of her own car on campus still. And for years and years and years, no one knew what was going on. There was one person who was arrested, but then they ruled him out. And no one figured out until this man named Sean Keane, became the chief of police years later. And I don't even know, I have to look at it, but I can't remember. I don't even think he was alive when the case happened. But basically he got in charge and he just said, I'm going to help. Here's all this cold cases. He divvied them out to all his officers. And then he said, I'm going to take the oldest one. And so he took this one, and even then he still took him years. And then finally through familial DNA, which is kind of the same thing that helped capture the Golden State Killer, he was able to figure out that it was this guy, and Jeffrey, his name was Jeffrey Hand. And he was dead already. He had died only like 3 years after the murder in the shootout for a totally separate crime. But they had a name now. They knew who did it. But it took them 46 years to solve that crime. I mean, he evaded capture technically for his whole life because he did die a couple years after. But so technically he didn't get captured, but it was just, that's such an interesting story to me. That's 46 years of a family not knowing what happened to their child. And then, yeah, so that one was really interesting. And then I also covered already Jack the Ripper, who is one of the oldest cold cases there is.
And, there are still new theories that come out about who he may have been.
Oh, yeah.
So, yeah, it's definitely a story that does not let up.
Yeah, there are people who dedicate their lives to figuring out who he is. They're called ripperologists. I learned that recently. I was like, and even Dylan was like, when he was editing, he was like, didn't know that was a thing. Now I know.
My favorite Jack the Ripper fan theory, fan theory, or I guess you can call it that or not, but is that he actually came to America, moved to Chicago, and became H.H. Holmes.
Yeah, that's a big one.
Who was a prolific serial killer from Chicago.
This is a big deal that he's talking about this because prior to being married to me, even now, he hated true crime. He never watched he was like, I can't watch Law and Order. I can't watch any of it. It's all bad. I hate it. And now I'm like, now you stay awake at night listening to my podcast over and over again. And so you've taken supportiveness to a whole new level.
I am not a true crime fan,
but you kind of had to become one.
I know lots about it now, but it's true crime.
You learned about it whether you wanted to or not, right, Dylan?
Exactly.
Right.
So where you're living, are there any stories in the news about serial killers in your state?
So recently, so they're not necessarily, I wouldn't say like serial killers, but.
Well, first off, we live in Tennessee.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Throw that out there. But
we actually had a couple pretty interesting cases. We had a man literally in our town who he was on the run, and he was literally hiding in the woods and in people's like deer hunting blinds for, I don't even know how long he was.
It was about 2 weeks.
I was going to say it was a couple weeks. And schools went on lockdown. We had friends who lived out in that area that he was supposedly in who came and stayed with us because like they were nervous because the area he was in is kind of the area where Dylan's family lives. So it's a little more rural. You
can say backwoods. It's okay.
So, and the guy even like, we found out later that he even hid out on
he was seen on some of my family's farmland, like through like deer, like hunting
he stole
cameras
something from their yard.
He stole jackets from barns and stuff like that, and he would just kind of like go through because you're talking thousands of acres of just empty farmland,
and your next neighbor is like 5 minutes down the road. Like it's just one of those type areas.
Mm-hmm.
So he basically hid for a couple weeks. He killed, I think, 2 people before going on the run. And he was caught. He was caught, and he now is in prison. But so that was a little scary for a while. And then we also just had like literally like 2 weeks ago, the guy from the prison. So a guy in a prison like 2 hours away from here.
Yeah.
He killed a woman who worked in the prison in order to escape. And he was on the run for not that long.
He was in low security. He was driving a tractor that he was like tilling land and everything for like the communal inmates and whatnot for their like garden. And then he got out, killed the person
she was living on the property of the prison, I believe.
I think so.
There wasn't a lot of information, but that one hit particularly close to home, because my dad is actually a corrections officer at a maximum security prison. So like he had to help, like he stood guard at her body for like for a few hours. And like, but it's just scary because it was like, I know my dad has a dangerous job, but like hearing that something happened to a corrections officer was a little less, ooh, yay, true crime in my neck of the woods, and more, ooh, no, I don't like that one.
Well, that literally gives meaning to too close to home, right?
Exactly.
yes.
Oh my gosh, yeah, for sure.
Well, we've had stories in the past about the Gilgo Beach killer.
Mm-hmm.
I guess he would kill prostitutes and he would bury him in the beach after he killed them.
Yes. Okay. Yeah. I think I have vague, memories of reading about that somewhere.
Yeah, they haven't caught him yet, or her, or whomever it may be.
Who knows? Yeah.
Him, her, them. Someone's doing it.
Yeah.
So, have you noticed any common threads in some of the people that you're reporting on, like the kidnappers and the killers?
Yeah. So there's a reason. So there's a joke. It's kind of like a joke among like people who are interested in this thing. That's like blame the mother. Like it's like, oh, it's always, if whatever happened, oh, blame their mother. But there's kind of truth behind that. In that, not always. I'm not going to make broad generalizations, but a lot of times these men and women have these horrific childhoods, or these, and it's not just moms, it's the dads too, but it's just like these childhoods that it's just like, you don't want to, because you know what a bad person they are, but you kind of read it and you go, man, they did not have a chance. Things like that. There's, parents who are abusive or just do these horrible things you could never even imagine. And then also there's head injuries that are always a good indicator of something that's going to happen.
Yeah.
But yeah, so it's hard sometimes because you read those stories and you read them and you're like, man, I know that he turns out to be this horrible man or this horrible human being, but man, I feel bad for him as a kid.
It's funny that you should mention that, because we were out, and as I was coming in, I was listening to a podcast about Ed Gein.
Yeah.
I was just going to bring him up.
Yeah.
I think he's the standard bearer for bad childhood.
Yep, and for blaming the mother. Yep, he had his mom was wild.
It was funny. One of the hosts was saying that he saw a picture of her and he said, he pretty much looks like you would expect her to look.
Oh yeah, yeah. If you look at her, you're like, yep. That's basically what I pictured. Makes sense. Yeah.
Did you? What do you think is the most common underlying reason for why serial killers kill?
It's hard to know, especially because I in no way, shape, or form am an expert. I am just for a lack of a better word, a fan. But I feel like a lot of it is, if I were to choose something, it would be undiagnosed or untreated mental illness. You hear about it a lot when you it's kind of like the thing with the parents. You read about this a lot. And you feel horrible because you're like, gosh, did you really have a chance to do better in your life? Did you really have a chance to be a better person? Because you hear these cases, and then they go to a trial, and then they inevitably go to a psychologist or a psychiatrist, and they find out they've got this laundry list of just these diagnoses and like these horrible mental illnesses, or these mental illnesses that they couldn't help. And it's hard. So you hear about that kind of stuff. It's like, again, it's just like with the parents, it's like, it's hard. You kind of, in a deep part of you, feels a tiny bit of sadness for them. And you feel bad for them. And then you go, wait a minute. They also did these horrible things that you can't forgive. But at the same time, it's like, wow, they had this stuff wrong with them. They had this stuff going on.
Especially, you're raised, not to want to kill.
Right.
And here are people that, once they've done it once, and, there's something that drives them to do it again. And, there's discerning between right and wrong. Yeah.
And it's especially hard when you read those, and those people who make those choices are children, because it's like they don't know right for wrong yet, or they've got a very vague understanding of right for wrong. Cause like as a parent, that's kind of what you're supposed to teach them is, hey, this is good and this is bad. But then these kids, sometimes they commit their first murder when they're in their 10, 11, younger even sometimes. Man, they had no chance to learn right from wrong.
Yeah.
They and then from there, you're right. Once it happens once, it's kind of hard to...
You get this detachment from emotion, in a sense. You see it with like a lot of children when they start, dissecting bugs, and then they move to animals, and then it's they're in a sense opening things up and seeing how they work, and then it always graduates. And then, like you said, once it's one, then how many more can I do? And it's fascinating. It's coming from someone like we've already said, that doesn't like true crime, but to see that graduation,
it's like escalation.
Yeah. That's a better way of saying it.
All right, we'll go into a little bit of a lighter subject here.
Yeah.
Now, since this is a show about podcasts, are there any podcasts that you guys like to listen to?
I'm going to be very boring because I have listened to a ton of I've listened to a few episodes here and there. I have a random podcast here and there. And I've listened to a few one-off seasons like Dr. Death and things like that. And ones that just have a very small season. But my one tried and true podcast that I will listen to almost daily, and I have gone back and re-listened to, is the podcast My Favorite Murder. I've listened to, like I said, I've listened to them 1,000 times. I've seen them live twice.
I've been once.
Yes, he got dragged along once.
It was very good.
Yeah, so they are my tried and true. And then when I need a break from them, which is very seldom, but my other one I really like is Lore.
Me,
you have a complete opposite taste in podcasts.
I'm a big old nerd. I am a huge fan of Dungeons and Dragons, so I listen to a Dungeons and Dragons podcast called Critical Role. I listen to the Adventure Zone, which is another group of people playing Dungeons and Dragons. I also really enjoy Lore, but mostly stick to the Dungeons and Dragons. Mostly nerdy podcasts.
And now we have the portion of the show that everybody loves. It's called Shameless Self-Promotion.
Shameless self-promotion. Shameless self-promotion.
And this is the part where you guys get to let our listeners know where they can get in touch with you.
I'll leave that up to you because that's kind of your niche. That's what you do for me.
So let me put on my voice. Morning Cup of Murder. No, Morning Cup of Murder. That's the name of the show, and that's pretty much where you can find the show on Instagram and Facebook. If you just look for Morning Cup of Murder. Then on Twitter, it's a little different because murder can't be used in the title, so it's a Cup of Murder. No. It's just, it was too long. So it's Cup of Murder. That's what it is. Something I was trying to build the other day wouldn't let murder be put in the tagline. It's a Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. And then if anybody ever wanted to get a hold of us via email, it's just morningcupofmurder@gmail.com.
Yeah. And then, the only other one I could think of is there's Patreon, but that's just for people who like it.
Yeah, there is a Patreon, and that, like I said, if you just search Morning Cup of Murder, it's all pretty well branded throughout. There is no full website yet.
Okay, well, we'll stay tuned.
Yeah, hopefully.
Yes.
We'll see.
Now, you guys said earlier before we started that I was your first interview?
Yes.
Yeah, you guys are actually the first married couple that I've interviewed.
Oh, we feel very special. That's because, like I tell people, we're very codependent. So there's never a venture that one of us does without the other one somehow being involved. So,
yes.
Well, Korina and Dillon, I'd like to say thank you very much for coming on down to the show.
Well, thank you for having us,
Jim. We appreciate being on.
It'll be hard to top.
Oh,
you as an interviewer.
and don't forget to check out
Morning Cup of Murder.
Yes.
Dun dun dun. Okay, let's say you like Morning Cup of Murder and you need something a little bit bigger, like Morning Jug of Murder. Well, that podcast doesn't exactly exist, but I do have a few more Sherpa suggestions for true crime podcasts that you can check out. We also have Monster, Serial, Insomniac, which we talked a little bit about during the interview, Up and Vanished, and Time Suck with Dan Cummins. Now, Time Suck isn't exactly a true crime podcast per se, but Dan is a really funny comedian and he goes over a lot of events in history, and he does cover a good chunk of true crime stories. And they really go into a deep dive on some of these if you're really into the gory details. And a warning that these other shows that are recommended, they can be a little graphic and go into some crazy kind of violence and blood and mayhem. So if you're a little queasy, some of these shows you might want to steer clear of. But Morning Cup of Murder is always a safe bet for you anyway, if you definitely want to just get a nice sampling of it. I think it's also important to point out that there are a ton of true crime podcasts out there in Podcastia. And the one thing that they have all in common, none of them end with, the Sherpa did it. Thanks so much for coming down to the Sherpa Chalet, and thank you again to Korina and Dillon of Morning Cup of Murder. Make sure you check out their podcast. If you haven't caught the other episodes, there's still plenty of time to listen to them. Don't worry, there's no particular sequence. Actually, if you start now and play them backwards, I don't mean backwards like... No, you don't do it like that. I mean in reverse order. Then you can see what was going on and what you missed over the season. We've got season 2 coming up, and next week we will actually have a little mini episode. And on that, we're going to acknowledge a lot of people who really helped make this podcast start to grow. We've got more growth to go, but we're off to a good start. I'm very happy with it, and I just want to show my appreciation. And not only will it just be a show of appreciation, we're also going to do a special Sherpa suggestions. And by that I mean, we're going to check out some of the shows that I regularly like listening to. We're also going to talk about what's coming up for season 2 and a couple other things I may have up my sleeve. If you want to hear our show, we're on about 10 different platforms like Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher. And on those you can leave a review. And there's also Radio Public and Podcoin, where you can actually earn money for listening to podcasts. And of course, Anchor FM, where you can actually leave a voicemail for this show. And if we like it, we'll play it on a future show. Sounds pretty cool, huh? While you're checking out the show, you can also check out the website, www.jimthepodcastsherpa.wixsite.com/website. Wow, I'm getting pretty good at saying all of that pretty fast.
Wow. Practice.
And if you have a TuneIn account, you can listen to this podcast on your Alexa speaker. It's really easy. You only have to do is say, Alexa, play Too Many Podcasts on TuneIn, and you'll hear the latest episode. And don't forget to follow us on social media, where we have a Facebook page, a Twitter page, and an Instagram page. And for Twitter and Instagram, it's the number Too Many Podcasts. And for Facebook, it's the word Too, T-O-O, Many Podcasts. Just to avoid any confusion. So there's plenty of ways to keep up with what's going on with the show and also to listen to it. So I hope you do that. And in the meantime, I hope you've had a Sherpalicious season and that you come back for season 2, where we'll have a lot more interesting guests and we'll have a lot of fun too. So be sure to check us out. And viva la Sherpalution. Mr. Bruce, take us out of here for the end of season 1. Thank you, sir. And thanks for listening. See you soon.
Thanks for listening to Too Many Podcasts. Please disperse. You can go home now. I said you can go home now. Viva la Sherpalution. Viva la Sherpalution. Oh. Yeah, I'll come back now, you hear?